Hi, this is Mark Meyer from MarTech Hero, and in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to actually have Zapier work with Eloqua. Like many of you, I went to Zapier and I searched for the app and I typed in Eloqua and I selected the result, and lo and behold, it says Eloqua integration not yet supported. Eloqua has not yet built an integration on Zapier, which was a little disappointing since most marketing automation softwares do have this already. This quick slide I put together just shows the major marketing automation software that currently has a Zapier native integration, and that's on the left side. And as you can see, it's all the big players: Marketo, Pardot, MailChimp, Constant Contact, ConvertKit, so on and so forth. On the right-hand side is the major marketing automation softwares that do not have native integration. And honestly, the only one I could find that does not have a native integration is Eloqua, which is a little bit disappointing to say the least. In fact, on the Eloqua community board called Topliners, on their Dream It section, this integration is one of the most wished upon improvements that people hope that Eloqua will make in the future, and have a native integration for Zapier and Eloqua. Okay, now I'm back over on Zapier's page, and this is where we're going to start to create a Zap that connects Eloqua with another integration. So I'm going to click on Create Zap. And then up here in the upper left, it says Untitled Zap. We'll just call it Eloqua Zapier. And for those familiar with Zapier, the first thing it says is it asks you what integration do you want to start with, or where do you want to start this at? And normally, if Eloqua had a native integration, Eloqua would be within these 5,300 plus apps that we could select. But like we stated, it's not a native integration, so we got to do it a little bit differently. So to step back, what can we do with Eloqua and Zapier? So basically, anything you could do with the Eloqua API, you could pretty much do with Zapier. So let's bounce over to the Oracle website, and this is the Oracle Eloqua API documentation. If we just kind of browse through here, there's a lot of different API calls or endpoints that we can call. For this particular example, we're going to create form data. So in other words, we're going to enter form data into we'll say a Google Sheet. And then that Google Sheet will make a call over to Eloqua and populate a corresponding form with that data. So I set up a Google Sheet already. It's called Zapier Eloqua Test, and I just have 4 fields on it: email address, first name, last name, and company. And then every time a row is added to this spreadsheet, I want Zapier to pass that information over to this particular form on my Eloqua testing site and populate the same fields on this. And I want it to be submitted. So this particular form, once it's submitted, if we look at the processing steps, it just updates the context with the form data. So how do we do this? So let's go back over to Zapier. And this is the trigger event that we have to select first. This is what triggers the API call, if you will, or the call to Eloqua on adding data to this form. In this example, we're just going to use, like I said, Google Sheets. Now, you could use anything you want as the trigger. If you have another marketing automation system for some reason, let's say you have HubSpot and there's a form on HubSpot, you could have HubSpot send the data from that form as the trigger event over to Eloqua. Or you could have, any of these 5,300 apps could send, can trigger the call over to Eloqua. But for our example, we're just going to make it kind of easy to explain, and we're just going to use Google Sheets. So I selected Google Sheets, and it says choose an event. We want this triggered whenever there's a new spreadsheet row added. So I'm going to select new spreadsheet row and then hit continue. This part right here is just asking what account is this Google Sheet tied to. So I'm going to select, and I have this test account here. And now it's going to ask us, what's the spreadsheet name? This happens to be the only spreadsheet I have on this particular testing account drive. So it's that one. And then the worksheet. The worksheet is just simply, there's a sheet one, the worksheet. So we had multiple sheets, there'd be multiple sheets out here, but we just have one worksheet. So we just select the only one available, sheet one. And now we could test this trigger. Right now, there's nothing in there. So let's hop back over to our Google Sheet file. And I'm just going to type in some sample data. And there we have a new row. So now back over on the Zap, let's test this trigger. So what it's doing is it's going out to the spreadsheet that we just entered the data on, and it's going to pull the first row. And as you can see, it successfully pulled all those fields in. So this looks like it's working great. So we're going to hit continue. Okay, this is the part that we want to connect it to Eloqua because we want those data fields, that row of data passed over to Eloqua. And normally you would select the native integration, like I've said countless times, but we can't do that. So how do we do it? We have to select something called Webhooks by Zapier, which is right here, or you could do a search for it. And Webhooks by Zapier is basically going to use the API, the Eloqua API. So for event, let's select this. For this example, we're going to actually do something called the custom request. And then we're going to hit continue. The method, I'll show you the examples here. You can do a get, put, post, patch. This is all API terminology. Basically, the get request, like it calls the Eloqua API and it returns data to you. But we want to post data from the spreadsheet or from step one up here, the trigger. We want to post it to the form. So we want to select post. Now it's asking for the URL. So to find the URL, there's two parts of it. First, we need our base URL. And I have a previous YouTube video out there about how to use Eloqua with Postman, which is an API tool. And it goes more into this. So you guys can check that video out if you need a refresher on that. But basically, like I said, the URL is two parts. We need the base URL. So the base part of the URL is kind of easy to find. You just go to your instance of Eloqua. And the base URL is simply the https://secure.p04.eloqua.com. Now, depending on what pod you're in on your Eloqua instance, this pod might be something different. Like if you're on pod 1, it would say p01. But in our case, it's pod 4. So we're going to jump back over to Zapier and put in that base URL. And now we need the endpoint. And to get the endpoint, which is basically the rest of the URL, we're going to jump back over to the documentation. And like I said, we're going to create a form data for a single form. So this is the other part we need. So we're going to copy this, head back over to Zapier, and paste that in. So now our URL looks like this. So you might notice that there's these little curly brackets and it says ID. What this is asking for, this is a variable that we need to enter. This is asking for what form ID is this? What form ID do we want to post this data to? To get that, it's pretty simple. You just go back over to Eloqua, and we're on the form here, the Zapier test form. And up here in the URL, you'll see it says form ID equals 23. So where it says ID, we simply erase those curly brackets, ID curly bracket, we replace it with 23. So this is just saying we want to post this data to this endpoint and the form ID is 23. For data pass-through, we don't need to worry about that now, so you can just keep that like it is. So data, when you send an API call over to Eloqua, you need to define what the data is you want to be passing. So in our case, we want to pass all that information that was in the Google Sheet. So we're going to get the format of what they want here, we're going to jump back over to the documentation where we're creating a form we're creating a form data for a single form. We're going to scroll all the way down. And they give you an example of a request body. We're going to just simply copy this and then make changes to it. So I'm going to copy, head back over to Zapier, and paste it in. So we're going to leave the top as is, the type is form data, and then it's going to say here's the field values, or what fields are we passing. The type of each of our field values is, we just keep it at field value. It's just the default here. The ID, that's actually the form element ID. For example, if I jump back over to Eloqua, email address, behind the scenes, there's an ID here, and same with first name and last name. So there's a couple ways we could figure this out. If you watch my Postman video and you have Postman up and running, one easy way is you could just go to forms, retrieve a form, and you just send this GET request over with form ID 23, and it's going to actually return to you in the body what the field ID is. It's going to say right here, ID 63. That's one way to do it. But you need Postman for that. If you don't want to do it that way, you just jump back over to Eloqua, and then you hit Actions up here on the right, and we're going to view form HTML. And we're going to scroll down until we see the part of this HTML in which the form fields are defined. Here we go. So here you see our email address is one of the fields. And if we scroll down, there's first name. So in this section, next to email address, you'll see it says FOR equals, quote, FE193. You can ignore the FE, but the the field ID for this email address is 193. So we got to remember 193. And then for first name, it's 194. Last name, it's 195. You can see it's just sequential. And company, it's 196. So now that we know that, we're going to jump back over to Zapier, and we're going to fill this out. So the first ID, which is our email address, if you recall, it was ID 193. It has this name field here. And I tested this. This actually does nothing at all. In fact, you don't even need this on the data call, but I believe you could just use it just to help. So when you're looking back at this, you could say, okay, this is email address. We're going to keep this. We're going to come back to this value in a second, but I'll fill out the rest of these IDs here. This one was for first name in our case. And then the next one we used was last name, and that was 195. And finally, we had company, which was 196. That was company. Okay, so now we have this. It's passing each ID. The name, like I said, it actually doesn't do anything. It's just kind of easier to look at this, though, if you're trying to figure out what each of these is, because you don't inherently know what 195 means. But now what we have to do is we have to pass our values from our spreadsheet in this data. So what we're going to do that is we're going to go up to where this on the sample I copied in, it says John. We're just going to erase John. And we're going to scroll down here. I put the cursor between those two quotes here. Now I'm scrolling down and it says insert data. I'm going to show all options. This is all the information that was passed from our trigger step from the Google Sheets. And you can see there's something that says email address. I'm going to just select that, click it once. And then if you go back up here, you'll see it says value equals, and between the quotes, it says email address. This means it's going to dynamically pull this information from our Google spreadsheet. And we're going to do the same for the first name, last name, and company. First name. And then last name. And we just got to make sure when we insert it, we still want those quotes there. So don't delete the quotes. And finally, we got company. So there you have it. So now our data looks like this. Explaining what the form field ID is and the value from our Google Sheet. And that's it. And you only have to do this the one time you're setting this up, and then it just automatically knows going forward. So I'm going to click off of that. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit more to answer more of these fields. Unflatten, we don't have to worry about that for this. We're just going to leave that as a default yes. The basic authentication. There's two ways in which we can authenticate that we have access to the APIs and to this Eloqua instance. So I should have mentioned that to use this Zapier, your Eloqua, your access on your Eloqua instance, you have to have API access. If you don't have API access, you can just ask your admin to give you API access, which just basically gives you access to make any of these API calls. So if you use basic authentication, all you would do is you would type in the Eloqua instance name, whatever you log in with, then \, and then your username within Eloqua, and then the pipe symbol, and then your password. So you could do it like that. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you a different way. So we're not going to use that particular basic authentication. What we're going to do is we're going to put it into the header. Now the header is just something, think of it as something that needs to be passed along with the API call just to explain some things to Eloqua on like what this is, and it gives it more information about the call. So we have to do a few things with the header. I guess don't worry about exactly what each of these do. You just type these things in, and you don't have, it's like you once and done, you just enter it once and then it remembers it. So for one header, we get to do something called accept. And I talk more about this in my Postman video too, if you are interested in learning more about this. This is star. I can also put all these headers that are required in the comments section of the video. The next one is Accept-Encoding. And we're just going to gzip deflate. User agent. And the user agent in this case, since we're calling it from Zapier, it's Zapier. Content type. And up here, we're passing this in a JSON format. So we actually put application /JSON. And then the host is hooks.zapier.com. Okay. So that's the headers. Now, if we put the basic authentication up here, like I said, with the Eloqua instance backslash username, pipe, password, that's all we would need. But I deleted that up here. So I'm going to add a different kind of authentication down here. So we're going to add the last header here. It's authorization. And then you pass what kind of authorization you want to pass in the header. We're just going to use the basic one. So I'm going to paste this here. And that's just a temporary authorization I'm using just for the purposes of this video. And then I'll obviously delete that. And then we're going to hit continue. And I should note real fast that if you did the basic authentication up here, you do not need this header row right here at all. It would just be handled by this one. So we're going to continue. And now we're going to test it, test action. And it's trying to send the request over. It says a request was sent to Webhooks by Zapier about 2 seconds ago. So it passed the test or tested successfully. Let's jump back over to our Eloqua form, go up to actions, and we're going to view submission data. And as you can see, the information we just sent is listed here. So back to Zapier. Everything looks great. So we can go ahead and publish the Zap. And it's going to say, do you want to turn this on? Sure, we'll turn on the Zap. And as you can see, it says here, Eloqua Zapier, the one we just created. It's running, so it's now running. So we can also test this live. Let's go back to our sheet. We're just going to add another name here. Say Babe Ruth at martechhero.com. Babe Ruth, and company is, we'll say, the Yankees. So once that's added, it's saved pretty regularly by Google Sheets. That's going to trigger the API Zap to run. So if we head back over to Eloqua, I'm going to go up to actions again and view submission data. And as you can see, it now has Babe Ruth added. So this Zap is working perfectly. So anytime a new row is added to this spreadsheet, that's what triggers the Zap. And we can view our Zaps back over at Zapier, of course. I'm going to go back into it. And we can go in here and edit it and make any changes we want. Also with Zapier, like most of you probably know, you could continue on this route. You can continue to, do link other applications through this. Or like we mentioned, in this example, we just started with the Google Sheets. You could start with any trigger you want. It doesn't matter. And then you could just pass that over to Eloqua using webhooks. So even though Eloqua doesn't have a native integration with Zapier, it still works with Zapier with just the use of webhooks. In the future, I'll do another video with maybe a more complex one, such as automatically downloading custom object data into a spreadsheet on a reoccurring interval or something of that nature. But for now, play around with this. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And thanks a lot for watching.